She thought she was buying a hopeless wreck, a half-sunken boat abandoned in the reeds for 2 decades. For $200 it was supposed to be scrap, something to tinker with and maybe part out. But when she pulled away the algae-covered hull, sparks didn't just fly. They revealed something glowing, sealed, and hidden deep in the metal. What she found inside didn't just change her life. It rewrote the story of her father, her past, and something buried long before she was born. Before we dive in, let us know where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from every corner of the world. And if stories of grit, mystery, and redemption light a fire in you, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story, it's even more unbelievable than this one. Let's get started. The dock creaked under her boots, each step sending ripples across the still water like nervous sighs. Emily Crane stood at the edge of Clearwater Marina, arms crossed, denim shirt damp from the morning fog, the scent of algae and rust thick in the air. It had been years since anyone had bothered to maintain this stretch of shoreline. The pilings were soft with rot, the planks warped like forgotten memories. But Emily wasn't here for the scenery. She was here because of a classified ad with 3 words that didn't sit right. Boat, as is, $200. She scanned the water. There, slumped at the far end of the inlet, half sunk and wrapped in moss like a drowned secret, was the vessel. 40 feet of neglected fiberglass and corrosion, maybe older than she was. The hull was a stained blue, barnacle-bitten and gashed near the waterline. A slow stream of air bubbles whispered from the crack. Something inside was still trying to breathe. The marina manager, a man named Daryl who wore a trucker cap like a second scalp, stood beside her, hands on hips. "I'd just scrap it if I were you," he muttered. "Washed up here, after that storm 2 winters back. No title, no history, no one claimed it." Emily nodded absently. Her gaze stayed locked on the boat's side. A jagged rip in the hull revealed a strange shimmer, like golden light bleeding through a wound. She blinked. Probably just reflected sunrise. "I'll take it," she said. Daryl raised an eyebrow. "You even see inside it yet?" "Nope," he whistled low. "All right, be my guest. Hope you like tetanus." He handed her the rusted keys from a ring that had seen better decades and shuffled off toward the office, boots thudding on the wet planks. Emily stood alone again. The water lapped gently at the shoreline. In the distance, a heron lifted off and soared eastward, wings cutting through the pale sky. She stepped forward, gloved hands gripping a length of rope as she pulled herself toward the leaning boat. It gave a low groan, as if waking from a nightmare. The interior was worse than expected. Rotting cushions, mold-eaten panels, and an air so thick she could taste salt and mildew. Tools would be needed. Lots of them. But she didn't flinch. She'd rebuilt worse. She'd learned to trust her gut, especially when it made no sense. She crouched low to inspect the cracked hull. That shimmer again, not a trick of light. It pulsed faintly, like something alive. The metal around it was warped inward, not from damage, but sealed. Welded, maybe. Reinforced from inside. Emily frowned. No storm did that. She ran her fingers along the edge. The metal was warm. And then, for just a moment, the light inside the crack blinked like a heartbeat. She didn't move. Something was in there. And whatever it was, it hadn't seen daylight in a very, very long time. Emily spent the rest of the morning hauling supplies from her truck pry bars, a portable torch, nitrile gloves, a crowbar she'd named Patience years ago. The town had long since stopped asking why a young woman with a mechanic's grip and a welder's eyes spent her weekends chasing rusted wrecks. Clearwater wasn't the kind of place that understood people like her. But the water had always pulled at her. Maybe because her dad had spent more time on boats than birthdays. Maybe because broken things made more sense than whole ones. By noon, the fog had lifted, revealing the boat in all its defeated glory. A name had once been painted in Navy script along the stern, but time and sun had chewed the letters down to a faint SS something. Emily traced them with a gloved hand, curious but not pressed. Names could wait. The hull could not. She climbed inside again. Floorboards soft underfoot, some squelching ominously. The cabin was tilted at an angle, every surface dripping with neglect. Half the controls on the dash were missing, and someone had torn out most of the wiring years ago. A calendar from 1989 was still pinned above the sink, its curled pages bleached pale. The last date marked was in red, July 3. Weird. She worked in silence, using her crowbar to peel back loose panels along the starboard side. Water leaked slowly into a basin near the stern, but the bilge pump surprisingly hadn't fully died. It hummed weakly when she flipped the switch. A small mercy. Hours passed. By mid-afternoon, Emily had cleared most of the interior debris, and that shimmer in the hull still pulsed faintly slow, consistent, like it was waiting for her to get serious. She sat cross-legged near the crack now, wiping sweat from her brow, staring at it the way someone stares at a riddle. It wasn't wiring, wasn't reflection. It looked internal, like something was embedded inside the hull itself. She leaned closer, flashlight aimed. There, at the very center of the crack, was a seam. Narrow, precision cut, barely visible to the eye, but unmistakably artificial. It didn't match the rest of the hull's construction. This wasn't patchwork or repair. This had been built into the boat from the beginning. "What the hell are you?" she whispered. She reached for her rotary cutter and hesitated. She wasn't reckless. She always assessed risk, always measured twice before slicing. But something about this, about the warmth in the metal, the way the light blinked once more like it knew she was close, made her set the blade to steel without another word. Sparks hissed. Steel peeled like bark, and then it opened. Inside the cavity, nestled between welded ribs and insulation, was a long metal canister, no wider than her forearm. Its casing was scorched, its surface marked by symbols she didn't recognize. And near one end, etched carefully by hand, was a name. Her father's, not just the last name, his full name, Nathaniel Crane. She dropped the cutter. Emily stared at the canister, as if it might vanish if she blinked. The name, her father's name, was etched in sharp, deliberate strokes across the scorched metal. Not painted, not labeled, etched. She ran her gloved fingers across the letters like they might spell something different under her touch. But there was no mistaking it. Nathaniel Crane. Her stomach turned cold. He'd been gone for over 12 years. A quiet man, soft-spoken, sharp with engines, terrible with emotions. He used to disappear for long stretches when she was a kid, always with the same vague excuse, working on something big. Then one day, he didn't come back. Car crash. That's what they said. That's what the police said. That's what the sealed report said. But her gut had never accepted it. And now, here his name was, hidden inside the hull of a sunken boat that wasn't supposed to exist. She crouched low, heart hammering, and examined the rest of the cavity. The canister had been secured with industrial clamps, bolted into the hull ribs. Whatever this was, it wasn't accidental. Someone had meant for it to stay hidden or preserved. The boat's condition made it easy to overlook, a perfect decoy. No one sane would think to search here. She loosened the clamps gently, each bolt shrieking against rusted threads. The metal groaned, as if reluctant to give up its secret. Finally, with a careful pull, the canister came free. It was heavier than expected, dense, maybe 6 or 7 pounds, and warm. Unnaturally so. She pressed her ear to it. A faint hum. Alive? No, not in the biological sense, but active. She carried it outside and set it gently on the dock. The late afternoon sun caught the edge of the casing, illuminating more than just her father's name. On the reverse side, nearly hidden beneath grime, was a stamped serial code and a set of initials burned into the steel. N.C.S.L.A. 77. 77. That was the year her dad quit the Navy. Or at least, that's what he told everyone. She'd done the math before he'd been 27 when he left service, picked up odd work at marinas, and eventually opened Crane's Marine Repair on the edge of town. He never talked about his Navy years, said it was just maintenance duty, said it was boring, but nothing about this looked boring. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos, hesitating before sending one to her contact at the scrapyard, an old friend of her dad's who used to serve with him. "You ever seen anything like this?" She typed. Found it inside a salvage boat. Names on it. His name. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then, a reply. "Emily, do not open that. I'm coming to you. Right now." She stared at the screen. The canister glowed faintly at her feet. Something inside it was waiting. And now, so was she. The sun dipped lower over Clearwater as Emily sat on the dock, legs folded, the canister resting between her boots like something ancient that had no business in the modern world. Her phone lay silent beside her. No more messages. Just that last one still glowing on the screen. "Do not open that. I'm coming to you. Right now." 20 minutes had passed. Maybe more. Her mind kept drifting back to the name on the casing. Her father's name, yes, but the other marks troubled her more. SLA. She'd never seen those letters in any of his old Navy records. She'd scoured them once as a teenager, desperate to understand why he'd always been half a ghost even when he was alive. He'd left behind so little, no journals, no explanations, just a few yellowing photographs and a pair of dog tags she kept in a drawer. But now here was this proof he'd kept something secret, something sealed, something possibly alive. She hadn't opened the canister. Not yet. But she'd traced every line of it with her hands, inspecting for a latch or seam. There wasn't one. It was smooth all around, except for a thin indentation running lengthwise. Seamless, except for the initials and numbers, the kind of design meant to keep people out. Or something in. A truck engine growled in the distance. Emily turned, squinting toward the gravel lot. A faded red F-150 rolled to a stop beside her own vehicle, and from it stepped a man she hadn't seen in over a decade. Heavyset, gray beard, tattoos faded into his forearms like stories lost to time. He walked stiffly, like his joints had forgotten how to move without pain, but his eyes were sharp, unmistakably military. "Uncle Roy?" she said, standing. "Kid," he replied, nodding once. "You shouldn't have touched that thing. You know what it is?" He ignored the question and stepped to the canister, staring at it with something between fear and reverence. He crouched slowly, running his thick fingers along the etched letters. "Nathaniel ever tell you about Project Salt Lantern?" he asked, without looking up. Emily frowned. "No. He barely told me anything about the Navy. Said it was boring maintenance duty." Roy huffed. That's what they always said when they weren't allowed to talk. Salt Lantern wasn't Navy. Not officially. Black Ops funded through private arms. Quiet. Deep water. Covert recovery. Recovery of what? Roy looked up at her, his eyes suddenly older than they had any right to be. Things that weren't supposed to survive. Emily swallowed hard. And this? Roy nodded slowly. Was his last assignment. After this, he went dark. Came home, shaken. Said he lost a friend over it. Said he buried the truth where no one would ever look. She looked down at the canister, glowing faintly in the dying light. "So why's his name on it?" she asked. Roy's voice cracked. "Because whatever's in there, he wanted you to find it." They didn't speak for a while after that. The sun dipped behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the dock as night crept in, soft and cold. Emily stared at the canister, her thoughts trying to outpace her heartbeat. Roy sat beside her, elbows on knees, the weight of whatever he knew hanging thick in the air. He finally broke the silence. "Your dad wasn't supposed to bring anything back. That was the whole point. Whatever they found out there, it wasn't for us." "Not really. But I think he knew it was never going to stay buried." Emily turned to him, her voice quiet. "What did they find?" Roy exhaled through his nose, rubbed his hands together like he was trying to summon warmth from memory. Something that went down in the Gulf during the tail end of '77. An object. Deep dive. No beacon. Picked up on sonar, moving on its own. Fast. They sent divers. Only 2 came back. Your dad was one. And the other? Roy didn't answer right away. His jaw worked for a moment before he said, "Never came up. No buddy. No bubbles. Just gone." Emily's gaze drifted back to the canister. Its glow had dimmed slightly, pulsing now like a slow breath. "He always said the ocean didn't give back what it took," she murmured. "I thought he was just being poetic." Roy gave a humorless smile. "He meant it. Whatever this is." He tapped the casing gently. "Your dad went to hell and back to keep it off the radar." She watched him for a long moment, then stood and climbed back aboard the boat, flashlight in hand. "There's something else," she called over her shoulder. "Where I found the canister. It wasn't just welded in. It was sealed like a vault. Purpose, built, like it had a home." Roy followed her back inside, grunting with each step. She crouched near the cracked hull again, running her light across the cavity. Something caught her eye. A flash of silver tucked deep into the edge of the insulation. She pried it loose. It was a small oilskin pouch, worn and brittle. She opened it slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, yellowed and damp with age. The ink had bled in places, but her father's handwriting was still unmistakable, sharp and deliberate. She read aloud, "If you're reading this, Em, I didn't want you to be. I hoped this boat would rot and sink before you ever laid eyes on her. But if you're here, it means I failed. Or maybe it means I finally trusted you to know. What's in that case isn't a weapon. Not exactly. It's a key. And there's more. Look under the galley floor." Emily's breath caught. She turned to Roy. "Help me open the hatch." He didn't ask questions. As she pulled up the first rusted panel, her flashlight caught the edge of something far older than the boat around it. Something metallic and shaped like a map. The hatch groaned as Emily lifted it, flakes of rust flaking off like scabs. Below the galley floor, instead of rotten wood and stagnant bilge water, lay a shallow compartment, reinforced, dry, lined with waterproof sheeting that had miraculously held up over the decades. Her flashlight beam flicked across its contents. There were 3 things inside. First, a heavy canvas satchel, military grade, marked only with faded stenciling, NC, and a number string that meant nothing to her. Second, a sealed metal box the size of a shoebox, bolted down, its surface scarred and pitted, like it had survived fire. And third, what had caught her eye first, a thin, rolled-up object that shimmered with faint gold when the light struck it. She reached in with steady hands and lifted the roll. It wasn't a map. Not exactly. It was a blueprint. Unfurling it carefully across the floor, she saw lines drawn in tight arcs and geometric formations, not like any nautical or mechanical plans she'd seen. And Emily had seen a lot. She could rebuild a diesel engine in her sleep, but this looked more like circuitry than coordinates. Symbols ran along the borders in a language she didn't recognize. Not Latin, not Cyrillic. Something else. Precise. Patterned. "What is this?" she whispered. Roy crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing. "That looks a hell of a lot like the schematics we saw on the platform. Salt Lantern's final haul." "You mean the object?" He nodded. "Yeah, that thing they pulled up from the trench. They didn't know if it was tech, organic, or both, and no one could translate the language. Hell, no one knew if it even was a language. But Nate, he thought it was a system, said it needed something to unlock it." Emily's heart skipped. She looked over at the canister sitting on the dock outside, still pulsing faintly. "A key," she murmured. "He said it was a key." Roy was silent for a moment. Then, he picked up the sealed metal box bolted to the bottom of the compartment and gave the latch a tug. It didn't budge. Emily reached for her impact driver. "Careful," Roy warned. "That box looks like it might be wired." She paused. "Wired how?" wired like the ones we used in transport missions. If they thought someone unauthorized was poking around, boom. Her hand dropped slowly. So what? We just leave it? No, Roy said. We open it, but we do it my way. He stood and left the boat, returning minutes later with a small kit from his truck, weathered, metal, and labeled in black marker. Detonation override. Emily watched him work precise, slow, eyes narrowed in focus. He clipped a probe to the box's edge and inserted a wire into the seam. A long, tense silence. Then, a soft click. The lid popped an inch open. Roy exhaled. We're in. Inside, nestled in black foam, were 6 items. A compass with a broken needle, a waterproof notebook, 3 antique coins from different countries, a pair of unmarked keycards, and a photograph. Emily picked it up and froze. It was her father, standing beside a man she'd never seen before, tall, pale, and wearing a strange insignia on his collar. And beneath them, a half-submerged sphere, glowing in the deep. Emily turned the photo over in her hands like it might offer more than just a frozen moment. But the back was blank. No date, no scribbled memory. Just the glossy paper worn soft at the edges, the corners slightly curled. Her father stood off-center, younger than she remembered, his expression caught between fear and awe. Beside him, the pale man stared directly at the camera, his eyes too sharp, too calm. The insignia on his collar resembled a compass overlaid with something unfamiliar. Not military, not corporate, something older. She handed the photo to Roy. Who's that with him? Roy stared hard, jaw clenched. That's Dr. Felix Vantor, civilian science lead on Salt Lantern. No one really knew who he worked for. He wasn't Navy, wasn't even American, far as we could tell. But he had clearance, higher than ours. Emily squinted at the image. And that thing in the water? Roy nodded slowly. That's the object. Last time we ever saw it on the surface. Her eyes drifted to the blueprint spread out on the floor, its alien lines glowing faintly in the flashlight beam. You think this map is to that? Roy scratched his beard. Maybe not a map in the way you're thinking, but a design, yeah, a plan. Nate always thought there was more to it. He believed it was built, not found. Emily's breath caught. You're saying someone made that sphere? No. I'm saying whatever made it didn't come from here. Silence swelled between them. The kind that carries weight, like the moment before a storm breaks. Emily turned to the waterproof notebook, nestled in the foam box. It had her father's handwriting on the first page. She opened it. Most of the entries were encoded, numbers and abbreviations she couldn't make sense of. But here and there, real words broke through, like roots, cracking concrete. Subject reactive to electromagnetic stimulus. No biological readings. Yet, compass deviation confirmed object distorts local field. Vantor says the internal material might be liquid memory. I don't know what the hell that means. We're not prepared for this. The last entry was different. Buried it here. Hull reinforced. Galley hatch compartment. If they come looking, I'm trusting Emily. She has the eyes. Her throat tightened. The eyes, she whispered. Roy looked up. He used to say that when you were a baby, that you had your mom's intuition, but his eyes said you could spot a lie in a mirror. Emily felt the notebook tremble in her grip. He left this for me, she said. Not the Navy. Not Salt Lantern. Me. Roy nodded. He knew it wouldn't stay buried forever. She turned to the blueprint again. A ring of symbols near the center pulsed under the beam of her flashlight. Embedded in one corner was a faint line, not just ink, but a contour traced in something metallic. A route, a location, coordinates. She read them aloud. Roy stood slowly. That's off the Gulf Coast, he said, near Black Reef. That area's restricted now. No charts, no dives. Emily looked at the canister. Then that's exactly where we're going. The next morning, the marina was quiet, except for the low buzz of a sander in the far dock, and the occasional cry of a gull overhead. Emily stood inside the boat's cabin, with a welding mask pulled low, sparks flying from the hull as she sealed the compartment shut again, this time stronger, cleaner, with steel that would hold against the pull of waves and time. She wasn't hiding the secret anymore. She was preparing it. The canister, the blueprint, the notebook, all now carefully stored inside a reinforced lockbox bolted under the helm. She'd built it herself last night in her garage, hands moving on instinct, like her father was guiding her. Every weld, every bolt, every layer of insulation had a purpose. This wasn't just salvage anymore. It was a mission. Roy stepped aboard with 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to her as she flipped up her mask. "You sleep?" "Not really," she muttered, taking the cup. "Too many questions. You always did think too much." "I get that from him." Roy sipped his drink and looked out at the water. "I filed a false registry for the boat this morning. New name, fake origin. Nobody's gonna question it unless they look real close." "What name?" He smiled. "Orion's daughter." Seemed fitting. Emily raised an eyebrow. "He used to call me that when I was a kid. Said it was from a story he made up." "Not made up," Roy said. "Old sailor's tale. About a girl who could hear things in the sea no one else could. Thought he was being poetic again." She looked down at her reflection in the dark water. "Maybe he was warning me." They spent the rest of the morning prepping the boat. The engine was dead, no surprise, but Roy knew a guy who owed him a favor and had a rebuilt Yanmar diesel sitting in his shop. By sunset, it was theirs. Emily rewired the paneling, replaced the corroded fuel lines, and soldered new connections with a steadiness that surprised even her. She wasn't just fixing a boat. She was resurrecting a ghost. By dusk, the Orion's daughter sat a little straighter in the water. The hull was sealed, the compartments rebuilt, and the new engine thrummed softly with promise. Emily stood at the helm, hands on the wheel, staring toward the open water. Roy joined her, tucking his jacket tighter against the breeze. "Black Reef's 2 days out. No landmarks, no anchor points, just water and coordinates. I can navigate," she said. "Dad taught me." Roy nodded. "He taught you more than that." They stood in silence as the wind stirred the lines and the mast creaked gently in its cradle. The town behind them was still sleepy lights in windows, the world unaware of what was quietly being set in motion. Emily looked down at the keycards, now tucked in her chest pocket, and the strange blueprint folded in a watertight sleeve by her side. This was no longer about finding out what her father had hidden. This was about finishing what he started. Word spreads fast in towns like Clearwater, faster than wind over water, faster than sense. By the time Emily and Roy finished fueling the Orion's daughter and tested the auxiliary power, the whispers had already reached the bait shop, the dock cafe, and the tackle counter at Morgan's General. People began stopping by. Not many. Just enough to be noticed. First was Marcy, who ran the fuel dock. Mid-60s, wiry, and perpetually chewing mint gum, she leaned against the piling with crossed arms and narrowed eyes. "I thought that tub was headed for scrap." Emily nodded without looking up from her tools. "Changed my mind." Marcy chewed for a beat. "Funny, your dad said something similar back in '78. Brought in a wreck half-burned, spent weeks gutting it in secret. Wouldn't tell nobody what he was working on." Emily paused. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Marcy said. "I also remember the day he came in looking like he'd seen a ghost. Never talked the same after. Quieter. Sadder." She looked at the boat. "You see something in this one?" Emily wiped her hands on a rag. "Yeah, something worth finishing." Marcy gave a slow nod and walked off, mumbling, "Just like him." Later that afternoon, a boy showed up 13, maybe 14, with a fishing rod slung over one shoulder and bare feet slapping the dock. He lingered near the stern, watching quietly. Emily glanced at him between socket wrenches. "You need something?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just heard you were bringing a boat back from the dead." She gave a tired smile. "Something like that. My grandpa used to say some boats choose who gets to fix them. Said your dad had that kind of luck. Maybe you do too." Emily looked at him harder. "Who's your grandpa?" Lyle Baines. That made her blink. Lyle had been her father's dockhand 20 years ago. They used to joke that Lyle could tie a knot faster than a man could lie. He'd passed when Emily was still in high school. You remember him? The boy asked. Emily nodded. I do. He left this, the boy added, pulling something from his pocket, a small brass coin, smooth-edged, weathered. Said if anyone ever brought a dead boat back to the water with crane blood in their veins, they'd know what it meant. She took it gently. One side showed a compass rose. The other, 3 interlocking waves. Roy walked up behind her. That's a sailor's mark. Old as they come. Means trust the current. Emily held it tight. That night, the marina quieted as a low wind rolled in from the Gulf. Most of the town went to bed unaware, but those who'd lived long enough to remember Nathaniel Crane, the real Nathaniel Crane, felt something in the air. An echo returning, a ripple from the past. And on the Orion's Daughter, Emily sat alone, studying the blueprint by lantern light, the lines of a journey waiting to be taken. The boat rocked gently beneath a silver dawn, ropes creaking softly like old voices murmuring from the water. Emily stood at the helm, sleep barely touching her eyes, the salt air brushing against her cheeks. The photograph lay on the chart table beside her, lit by the rising Sunday. She couldn't stop staring at the man beside her father. There was something about his face, not just the unusual calm, but the shape of his jaw, the way his left hand hung at his side like it didn't belong to him. She felt like she'd seen him before. Not in life, but in stories. Old ones. Shipwreck tales. Whispers of a diver who never surfaced. A man who walked into the sea and didn't drown. She turned to Roy, who was refitting a depth gauge along the aft console. Why didn't you tell me he existed? Because, he said without looking up, I didn't believe he did. Not until I saw that photo. Emily's voice lowered. Who was he? Roy tightened a bolt with a slow click. Classified. That's what they said. No last name, no rank. Just called him Felix, like that was enough. He didn't come on the books. Didn't eat in the mess. Slept on the platform, but nobody ever saw him sleep. Was he human? Roy finally looked up. Your dad thought he was. Said he bled like one. But sometimes, when he'd talk, it felt like he knew things no person should. How deep the object was without sonar. What it was made of, even though we'd never cracked it open. Emily shivered. So he was there when they pulled it up? Roy nodded. Led the dive. Had this weird helmet, not Navy issue. Looked more like old Soviet tech. We thought it was a joke. But he was the only one who came up without bleeding from the nose. She swallowed. What happened to him? Roy paused, gaze distant. Disappeared 3 days later. One night he was drinking black coffee on the platform, staring out at the waves. Next morning, gone. No splash, no blood, no goodbye. Emily stared at the photo again. Do you think he left something behind? I think your father did, Roy said. And I think Felix told him how to hide it. She turned to the notebook, flipping back to the last legible page. Something she'd missed before was scrawled in the corner, faint, almost invisible. Felix said the sea remembers. Always. But it only speaks to blood. Emily felt her pulse quicken. She thought of the coin from the Baines boy, the blueprints, the map traced in symbols no one had decoded, and the canister still pulsing now beneath the deck, slow as a heartbeat. If Felix is still out there, she said quietly, he'll be waiting at Black Reef. Roy didn't argue, because something in both of them knew this wasn't just a recovery. It was a return. The second night at sea was darker than the first. No moon, no shoreline. Just the endless pitch of open water and the soft hum of the Orion's Daughter cutting through it. Emily stood at the bow, wind tugging her jacket, salt mist gathering in her lashes. The stars overhead shimmered like broken glass, scattered across a black floor. And below, the sea whispered in a language older than thought. They were halfway to Black Reef. Roy had gone below deck hours ago, muttering something about fixing the portside bilge intake, but Emily hadn't moved from her post. Not since the air shifted, Not since the compass needle began to drift. It hadn't swung wildly, hadn't spun, just drifted, like it was being pulled sideways by something too large to see. She tapped it once. No change. The GPS was dead now, too. Static. Every satellite reading failed, replaced by blank coordinates. Not jammed, just empty. Then she felt it, the vibration, subtle at first, like a shiver in the hull. She stepped back, placed her hand on the nearest support beam. It was pulsing, not the engine, not the wind, the boat. She scrambled down into the cabin, heart thudding, and opened the sealed compartment under the helm. The canister was glowing brighter than ever now, casting eerie gold reflections against the walls. Its hum had deepened, no longer mechanical, but something warmer, something closer to breath. "Roy!" she shouted. He appeared instantly, wrench in hand. "What?" she pointed. "It's doing something." He froze. "That's not good." Suddenly, the boat lurched hard to starboard, not from wind or current, but like it had been nudged. Emily hit the wall. Roy caught himself on the hatch ladder. From below the floorboards came a sharp, splitting sound, metal groaning, wood popping. They rushed to the galley hatch. The hull had cracked. Not from pressure, not from impact. From inside, Emily knelt, prying up the floor, and gasped. The compartment where the canister had first been found, the one her father had welded shut decades ago, was opening again. Seam lines that had vanished with rust were now glowing faintly, outlining a perfect oval seal. Roy leaned closer. "It's reacting." "To what?" "You." The seal hissed. The metal flexed, then slowly slid open like a mechanical iris, revealing a new chamber, one they hadn't seen before. Inside was water, dark and still. And floating in the center, weightless, was a sphere. Not large, maybe the size of a melon. But it pulsed like a living thing, light blooming inside it in rhythmic flashes. Emily stared. It looked like the photos. It looked like the object her father had recovered in '77, but smaller, or maybe younger. Roy whispered, "There's another one." Emily's voice was barely a breath. "No, this is the one." She reached toward it, and the sphere flickered. And for the first time, something whispered back, not in sound, in thought, a word she didn't recognize. But it felt like her name. The sphere hovered inches above the brine, glowing soft gold with streaks of deep blue curling inside like ink in water. It pulsed in sync with Emily's breath, like the air between them had synchronized. She knelt closer, her fingers trembling. She didn't touch it. She didn't have to. Images flickered through her mind, fast and sharp, like lightning in reverse. Not memories, but something deeper, woven through instinct. Water, stretching forever. A dark shape rising beneath the waves. Her father, younger, eyes wide with awe and terror, and a voice not male, not female, but ancient, speaking not in words but in feeling. Roy's voice broke the trance. "Em, you okay?" She blinked. The sphere dimmed slightly, as if retreating. "I saw something," she whispered, "or felt it. I don't know." He crouched beside her, careful not to get too close. "They called this thing a vault," he said. "Back when we first brought it up, the scientists thought it might be storing something. Energy, data, maybe memory." Emily looked at him. "Memory?" He nodded. "They said the material wasn't metal. It was biological, like a shell grown over time. It records things, holds on to them, like coral, but intelligent." She shivered. "And you touched it?" Roy shook his head. "I tried. So did Nate. It didn't react to any of us. But it's reacting now." He looked at her. "Because it's yours now." She turned back to the sphere. It floated lower, nestling gently into the saltwater basin in the center of the hull. Around it, the metal walls were no longer dull, they shimmered faintly, lines of light arcing outward in patterns that matched the blueprint's strange geometry. The floor beneath the sphere was etched with new shapes, like circuitry laid bare. "What is all this?" she asked. Roy hesitated, then stood and reached into the folds of his jacket. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper, thin, weathered, and old. He handed it to her. "I wasn't supposed to keep this," he said, "but I couldn't throw it away." It was a military report, stamped, unconfirmed. The date read, the 12th of August, 1977. The heading, Re. Unregistered contact Black Reef site, Alpha. Recovered object. Unknown. Responsive to biological imprinting. Emily scanned it quickly. Words jumped off the page. Surface breach at 03:00 hours. Visual contact with secondary entity. Loss of diver 2. Vanter, F. Subject initiated luminous reaction upon contact with diver 1. Crane, N. Emily looked up, eyes wide. "Wait, Vanter died?" Roy shook his head. "That's what they told us. But I don't think he did. I think he became part of this." She looked at the sphere, which now pulsed faster. "There's more down there, isn't there?" Roy nodded. The vault was just one piece, and if your dad was right, Black Reef is the key to the rest. Emily stood, resolve setting in her bones. "Then we go tomorrow." Roy looked uneasy. "Once we cross into restricted waters, we're alone. No Navy, no rescue, no turning back." She nodded slowly. "That's the idea." The sky cracked open the next morning, stormless but loud, as if the wind knew what they were sailing toward. Emily guided the Orion's daughter through a narrow channel of reef just past sunrise, following the strange coordinates burned into her father's blueprint. The water turned black beneath them, calm yet bottomless. GPS was still dead. Compass still drifting. They had entered the reach of Black Reef. Roy stood at the bow with binoculars, scanning the horizon. Nothing but endless sea. No marker buoys, no patrols. Just silence so thick, it felt engineered. "This was where it happened," he muttered. "Right here. The retrieval, the breach, everything." Emily didn't need to ask how he knew. The sphere below deck had grown warmer overnight. Not in a threatening way, more like anticipation. It pulsed whenever she stepped near, as though it knew they were close. Like it could feel home. She anchored in the center of the grid, outlined in the map, then killed the engine. No sound but the waves brushing gently against the hull. Roy disappeared below deck, returning minutes later with a laminated folder, sealed in plastic. Inside were documents her father had compiled before his final dive. Diagrams, logs. A hand-sketched sonar profile of something massive resting beneath the trench. "What is that?" Emily asked, pointing at the largest diagram. Roy hesitated. "It was never in the official files, but your dad believed the sphere was just one piece of a larger structure, like a node in a neural network. This," he tapped the drawing, "was the central core. He called it the vault root." Her eyes scanned the shape. It resembled a coiled bloom, part flower, part machine buried in the sediment layers hundreds of meters below the sea floor. "But they never reached it?" Roy exhaled. "They tried. That's when Vanter disappeared. And your dad, he stopped speaking after that. To anyone. Said we weren't ready for what was buried down there." Emily's voice was soft. "He told me it was a crash." Roy nodded. "Maybe it was. But not the kind we expected. Not fire from the sky. Something older, slower. Like it sank here, on purpose." She felt a tremor under her feet. Not seismic. Intentional. The water around them rippled, concentric rings spreading outward from the hull like the sea was responding to an invisible drop. She rushed below deck. The sphere was glowing again, this time projecting thin bands of light outward from its surface. They stretched across the cabin, forming a grid in the air, lines connected, dots aligned. And then, a shape began to form. A vessel, not human, not anything known, hovering, suspended, woven from memory and code. She reached toward it, the sphere blinked once. Suddenly, an image burst across her mind, her father, underwater, eyes wide, screaming through his mask. Not in fear, But warning, the memory wasn't hers. It was the sphere's. And it had just shown her what really happened in 1977. Emily staggered back from the projection, breath shallow, chest tight. The image still echoed behind her eyes, her father deep underwater, tangled in a field of light, reaching for something that pulsed with awareness. Not an object, not a relic, something that recognized him, and then it pulled him in. She gripped the rail to steady herself as the memory receded, replaced by Roy's voice calling from above deck. "Emily, you need to see this." She scrambled up the hatch, heart pounding, and stopped cold. The ocean around the Orion's Daughter was glowing not from the sky, but beneath. Soft gold and blue light shimmered just below the surface, moving in long ribbons like the reef itself was waking up. Patterns swirled under the boat, expanding out in perfect symmetry. Emily stared over the side. "What is this?" Roy's voice was hushed. A response. "To what?" "You." The moment the words left his mouth, the compass at the helm snapped violently north, then went still. A deep rumble rolled through the hull, low and ancient. Not like an engine or a quake, more like something breathing beneath them. Something massive. A crack appeared in the water 50 feet off the bow, not a fissure in rock, but in light. The ocean shimmered, split along a glowing seam, and slowly peeled open, revealing a dark void below. No bubbles, no churn, just black. And from the center of that blackness, something rose. Emily couldn't breathe. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a creature. It was a structure the same shape she'd seen in the sphere's projection. Towering, spiral, organic, metallic. Like it had grown rather than been built, covered in the same alien script she'd found on the blueprint. And now, it was surfacing. "Is that the vault route?" she whispered. Roy's jaw moved, but no words came. The structure hovered just beneath the waves, perfectly still. Then, at its highest point, a soft pulse of light blinked once in the same rhythm as the sphere below deck. Connected. Emily ran to the helm, grabbed the sealed box containing the sphere, and unlatched it. The moment she lifted the lid, the sphere floated upward, not falling, not bouncing, just lifting, like gravity had stopped applying. It rose into the air above the boat and drifted toward the vault route, like a compass returning home. "No," Emily whispered. "Wait." But Roy put a hand on her shoulder. "Let it go. He wanted this." As the sphere reached the vault route, it slipped into a circular opening and locked in place with a soft chime. The vault pulsed once, then twice. Then the ocean fell still, and from the quiet came a sound. Not noise, not vibration, but language, spoken not into the air, but into their minds. And Emily understood. Not the words, but the feeling. It remembers you, and now, it remembers everything. The light spread outward in quiet waves, not blinding or violent, just a soft, golden cascade that shimmered across the sea like morning stretched thin. The vault route began to hum, low and resonant, vibrating through the hull of the Orion's Daughter as though the water itself had become an instrument. Emily clutched the helm with one hand. The other pressed flat against the rail, steadying herself as the glow pulsed across the horizon. No danger, no heat, but something was undeniably happening. Roy stood at the bow, wind pushing back his hair, face lit with awe. "It's broadcasting," he said, barely audible over the hum. "Not a signal, not radio, something deeper. Like sonar? Like memory," he replied. Below them, the vault route's surface began to shift, panels unfolding in slow spirals, revealing lattices of moving light. Shapes rearranged themselves, symbols rotating into new configurations. For a moment, it looked like a flower blooming in reverse, layers peeling back to expose its core. The ocean around the structure changed too. Fish rose from the deep, not startled, not fleeing but gathering, schools of them in tight, organized formations, like sentinels returning to a long-forgotten post. "It's rewriting the sea," Emily murmured. "No," Roy said, voice low. It's restoring it. She turned to him. I think this was a life form, he said. Not a ship, not a machine. Something ancient that used biology the way we use steel. Your dad didn't just hide it. He kept it alive. And now? She asked. Roy met her gaze. Now it remembers what it was for. As the vault pulsed again, a soft beam of light arced across the water and struck the Orion's daughter just below the helm. Emily tensed, but instead of damage, a new panel emerged from the cabin floor. Seamless, like it had always been there. She knelt, pried it open. Inside was a single card, same design as the ones her father had left. And beneath it, a metal plate, engraved with words in 2 languages. One was English. Biological keyholder confirmed. Crane. E. Emily touched the card. It was warm. And then, something else shifted, not on the boat, not in the sea, but in her. A door opened inside her memory. She saw herself at 5, on her father's shoulders, pointing at constellations. At 12, watching him sketch strange shapes in the margins of his notebooks. At 16, asking about the wreck he never spoke of, and watching the light fade from his eyes. And then, an image she'd never seen her father, alone on this very deck, tucking the sphere into the hull, whispering something into the water. One day she'll bring you home. Emily blinked. Tears ran hot down her cheeks. The vault had always been waiting, not for a soldier, not for a scientist, but for his daughter. The vault root drifted just beneath the surface now, calm and quiet like it had exhaled after holding its breath for decades. The light dimmed to a soft, steady pulse, no longer reaching outward, but glowing inward, as if settling into rest. Emily sat on the deck of the Orion's daughter, legs folded beneath her, the engraved metal plate still in her hands. Crane, E. Not just her name, but her father's trust, etched in steel. She traced the letters with her thumb, eyes stinging in the late morning Sunday. Beside her, Roy sat silently, cap pulled low, a flask untouched at his side. They had seen something the world had tried to bury, not just a structure beneath the sea, but a connection between father and daughter, between memory and machine, between the past and whatever came next. How long do you think it's been waiting? She asked, softly. Roy exhaled. Longer than either of us have been alive. Emily looked out at the still water. The surface above the vault was clear now. No shimmer, no swirl. Just ocean undisturbed. It would vanish again soon. She knew that. Sink back beneath the waves, invisible to satellites and sonar and greed. Hidden, as it had been before, but not forgotten. Not anymore. She rose and walked back to the helm, placing the new keycard beside the original one her father had left. The two slid together perfectly, forming a shape that matched the central design in the blueprint, not a lock, but a circuit. Complete. This was never about finding treasure, she said. It was about carrying something forward. Roy nodded. Legacy. She turned to him. You think the world's ready to know? He gave her a long look. Doesn't matter. It knows you. That's enough. The wind picked up slightly, rippling across the deck. Seagulls wheeled overhead again, returning as if summoned by the calm. The compass on the helm spun once, then clicked back to true north. Emily smiled. It was time to go home. They pulled anchor and eased the throttle, the boat sliding away from the vault's resting place like a respectful goodbye. As they left the reef behind, the glow beneath the water faded into memory, the sea claiming its secret again. But something had changed, not just in the ocean, in her. For years, she'd carried questions like anchors about her father, about his silence, about why he left things buried. But now she understood. He hadn't been hiding shame, he'd been protecting wonder. And in trusting her with it, he'd restored both of them. As the coastline of Clearwater appeared on the horizon, Emily turned back for one last glance. Nothing was visible now, just water, flat and endless. But she knew it was there, waiting for the next storm, the next signal, the next voice brave enough to listen. She gripped the wheel, not just a mechanic, not just her father's daughter, a salvager of legacy, because some things aren't meant to be found, they're meant to be finished.